What makes a moment unexpected? Is it the shock of a tragic loss like what happened in Genosha, a surprising and severe shift in creative leadership, or an unexpected romance? To me, it's really all of the above, especially when it comes to X-Men history. M-Day has to have been one of the worst moments in mutant history. Decimation is by far one of the worst things to have ever happened to mutant kind, with even recent mass extinction comic book events which led up to this ultimately being overshadowed by the devastation of M-Day. M-Day happened as a result of Scarlet Witch striking out at mutant kind after the events of House of M, where she attempted to create a reality where many heroes were happy, but after learning of its falseness, was once again rejected by all those she had tried to help through reshaping reality. Namely though, Wanda was striking out at her then to be believed father, Magneto, who she claimed loved mutant kind more than he did his own family. Ooh. Wanda said the words "no more mutants," and with that small utterance, depowered or destroyed millions of mutants the world over. Not only was the creation of the House of M universe surprising, especially in regards to on how massive a scale it was in the comics, but the fallout after would change the X-Men for years to come. How do you feel about massive scale events? Personally for me, I love things that go big and which make significant changes to the universe afterward. I think when it comes to events, it's always best to go big or go home. Make it big and make it mean something for both the world and the readers, you know what I'm saying? Jonathan Hickman announced in 2021 that he would be leaving his creative position as head of X come 2022. Many of us at the time reacted with some shock and worry over the uncertain future of the X books we had come to fall in love with over the past few years, since Hickman helped to revitalize the X-Men and mutant kind. And I think now that we're in 2024, some of that feels valid and some of it is surprisingly still doing alright. It's been a weird time. One of the most unexpected relationships to have ever existed in the X books, or at the very least one of the most controversial, was the one between Archangel and Husk. Now, why was this considered so weird and so unexpected? Well, Angel was one of the first ever X-Men on the original team of X-Men, by the way, back in the 1960s. Now, time works in some weird ways, I'll grant you, when it comes to comics, but Husk on the other hand was known to be the younger sister of Cannonball, who himself was a much later addition to the X-Men comics, first appearing almost 20 years after Angel on the New Mutants team in 1982. And Husk, Paige Guthrie, his younger sister, appeared 2 years later than that, in 1984. She was believed to be in her late teens or her early 20s, while Angel, although somewhat ageless and more ambiguous, would likely be in his 30s, I would say late 30s at least, if not older than that. And it was implied that he was quite a bit older throughout their relationship, to be honest. Add in the fact that these two got busy in the sky above the Guthrie family home, and yeah, you can see why so many fans were left bewildered and perhaps surprised by this relationship, myself included. If you've been keeping up with the modern era of X-Men comics, then you know in Inferno issue number 2 of the special event series, the most recent Inferno, we saw Colossus join the Quiet Council. Now, his addition to the Quiet Council left X-Force readers startled, as they knew Colossus was no longer seemingly in control of his body after having become a sleeper agent for Russia against his will. Russia's mutants for a long while were working to take over Colossus and turn him into their own agent, and it seems in issue number 24 of X-Force that they ultimately were successful, even getting him to kill his own new romantic partner, Gala, who he actually seemed to care pretty deeply for. Pretty sad, and honestly that whole thing was very surprising when I read it. I was like, wait, what? Sometimes referred to as the Morlock Massacre, back in the day it was simply known as the Mutant Massacre. This was before massive mutant attacks like Genosha ever happened in the comics, which is also what made this even so shocking and horrible. We hadn't really had anything quite like this before. Although it happened on a smaller scale, the Mutant Massacre happened when Mr. Sinister, in essence, ordered the Morlocks be eradicated. He was like, get him out of here. He was like a gangster. He was like, make him swim with the fishes, you know? He sent his team of marauders to handle them and attack, killing many who lived down in the sewers. Now, for those who are unfamiliar, the Morlocks are basically less pretty mutants, let's say, ones who have dramatic physical mutations which often make it impossible for them to walk among humans on the surface world. Like, oh, poor Leech. Guys, I'm not over X-Men 97 the other day, it's breaking my heart. During the more recent Inferno event, a lot of truths were unearthed about the true allegiances of those who came together to create Krakoa, and just exactly who was behind the whole Mutant Island paradise. As readers, we already knew the story, but not all mutants did. In fact, not many mutants did, to be real with you. The truth was that Krakoa was founded by Magneto and Professor X, yes, but in addition to their ally and friend Moira McTaggart, who we recently found out during the House of X series was actually a mutant. Surprise, surprise. Moira claimed she wanted to help her fellow mutants, but in reality, she actually planned to end mutant kind. But instead of destroying them, she wanted to disguise her destruction in the guise of a mutant paradise, giving them kinda like one last hurrah, as they would then of course die out shortly after Krakoa rose to power. During Inferno, Moira's betrayal was brought to light and she was exiled from Krakoa. Though that most certainly would not be the last we'd see of her. Her evolution overall in comics, I would say, in recent years has been very unexpected. For better and for worse at times. What has surprised me about the Hellfire Gala, you ask? Well, while all of them were surprising kind of in their own way, some were more surprising than others. Namely the last Hellfire Gala we got, which also probably was the last one we'll ever see. Possibly ever. Probably ever. I mean, this is comics, so I don't like to say never again because you just don't know what'll come back around. It's all very cyclical. Still, what was startling about it was that it indeed felt just so final. Much more final than I was expecting, and it was honestly less of a gala and more of just a straight up massacre. I had learned that Dazzler was going to make the cut for the new X-Men team that year, and then just like that, pretty much all the X-Men were destroyed when Nimrod crashed the party. I wasn't expecting it to go so bad so fast, so I was one of the people that was reading it that was like, what's happening? The history of Genosha has pretty much been tumultuous and widely awful since the beginning of the comics. The island nation prospered for most of its history thanks to mutants who were born there and once identified had their free will stripped of them. At one point, Magneto got ownership of the island nation and attempted to turn it into a nation for mutant kind, trying to take it back, a place where mutants could call their own, reclaiming it and turning it into, in essence, a slice of paradise. This ended in disaster when millions of mutants were murdered on the island after it was attacked by Cassandra Nova's wild sentinels. It was a brutal and dark moment in mutant history, with the island being put on quarantine so that even those who did survive this attack, should they try to escape, were basically ordered to be shot on sight. So somehow even more surprising was the integration of the Genosha Mutant Massacre storyline known as E for Extinction into the new X-Men animated series, X-Men 97, which is a continuation of the 90s classic. I had been pondering the whole time what was going to be happening with Genosha ever since I heard in that second episode that they're like, that's gonna be part of the United Nations. Which I also correctly theorized would incorporate some ideas from the modern Krakoa era into its animated version. I figured we were gonna get a melding, and we did. Yay. Finally though, when we did get the story of what was going on with Genosha, with the United Nations, yes, acknowledging it as its own mutant island nation, things took a dark turn and ended in complete and utter destruction. Similar to how things went down in E for Extinction, with a wild three-headed sentinel, the same one actually from the comics, being unleashed on the island, although just who sent it remains a mystery at the time of this recording. Because I'm not so sure it's Cassandra Nova. But also, could it be Cassandra Nova? I don't know. I think one of the most surprising moments we have had recently in X-Men history has actually been the announcement 1 week prior to the release of the X-Men 97 series that creator and showrunner Bo DeMeo was either fired or had parted ways with Marvel and Disney. This was right before the show was slated to premiere, and both the side of Disney and Marvel as well as the side of DeMeo have refused to comment on specifically what happened there, leaving us all to just speculate in the wings. Many have had their theories as to what went on. I've done multiple videos on it myself, but the fact remains that this becomes more and more bizarre and unexpected as the show continues to grow and expand in popularity and acclaim, seemingly with each episode's subsequent release. It's getting better and better, and we are not getting any answers on this. If the X-Men had a middle name, it would be drama.
From secret siblings to strange romances and even unexpected team breakups, join us as we delve into some of our favorite unexpected dramatic X moments. Let's look at an odd love story, The Island Lovers. Krakoa, now the safe space for mutants to exist and thrive, is technically a mutant themselves. Well, half a mutant. Akara was an ancient mutant that eventually grew into a massive island. Pretty soon, someone came by with the Twilight Sword and cut the island in half. But using that sword caused a portal to Ament to open. Ament is a world in another dimension, and this world is dark and full of bad things. One half went there, that half was later named Arakko, and the other half, Krakoa, stayed here on Earth. The two sides of this mutant were separated for a long time, growing on their own and becoming their own islands. In the era we are used to, Summoner was being sent on a mission to Earth from the demon planet, so he took a small part of Arakko, the Arak Coral, as his mode of transport. If all that wasn't enough, something truly unexpected happened when the Coral met Krakoa. They got together, presumably in a romantic sense if the dialogue from the X-Men present is anything to go off of. In the end, the actual Arakko Island wanted to stay as its own island, and it was just the Coral that got involved with the mutant safe haven.
Not only is this next moment in X-Men history centered around a surprise party, so surprise, but it also involves the most bizarre and unexpected turn of events. Professor X decided to throw a surprise party for Kitty Pryde and hired the most inappropriate clown, Obnoxio, for the party. In this first panel, we see Obnoxio smoking a cigar and thinking about how he's going to spend the pile of money the professor promised him. The even weirder part of the story is that while this crazy party is going down with this ridiculous clown, the X-Mansion is also at the same time infiltrated by a villainous mutant who can turn himself into ice cream. Yeah, and that's not even the weirdest thing about him. Appropriately, his name is Ice Cream, but it is not spelled like how you think. It's spelled like an eyeball and the shrieking sound that is referred to as a scream. What's more is no one seems to know that Obnoxio is even coming to this party. I guess it's like a super secret surprise. And Obnoxio also ends up in a ridiculous fight with the X-Men where he also surprisingly manages to hold his own pretty well.
I don't want that clown at my birthday party, but what I do want, genuine a history textbook from the Marvel Universe with all the changes Marvel characters have made to history, because Wolverine is everywhere. He is collecting major historical events like he is trying to fill out a bingo card. Today we are looking at the time he checked off the Valentine's Day Massacre. The year is 1929. Wolverine is established to be a smuggler for the Prohibition era, and he has a girlfriend. He is also, of course, being pursued by Victor Creed, Sabretooth. When is he not? Wolverine heads out into Chicago, but when he gets back to his hotel, his girlfriend is there on the floor, lifeless. Wolverine thinks it was Capone who did it, Al Capone, because they are in Chicago. But Al Capone insists it wasn't him, and he gives Wolverine a paper with the location of the guy who did it. Guess what the location was? That's right, the garage for the Valentine's Day event. There were 8 men there in the Marvel Universe, not 7. Of course, Wolverine's healing factor saves him, and we find out that the reason Al Capone even came up with the Valentine's Day treat was because Sabretooth suggested it. Do the Wolverine writers just have a roulette wheel in their office with all the painful historical events on it, and whenever they need inspo on how to make Wolverine's backstory more tragic, they just write about whatever it lands on? I don't know. Wolverine at the Valentine's Day event and Sabretooth being the mastermind behind it is just something I never ever could have predicted.
Wolverine and Sabretooth both do have a surprising amount to do with history. I guess that's what happens when you get as old as they get to be. But we all know that Cyclops, aka Scott Summers, has always, as long as he's been around, which has been a lot less of time, had a thing for Jean. But when it comes to the classic X-Men team, he actually wasn't the only one. In fact, pretty much everyone was head over heels for Jean at one point, maybe except for Bobby, who back in the day, honestly, he did like to flirt, but mainly was really more in love with ice cream. Bobby was truly the youngest of the bunch, as is evident by his super obsession with ice cream. Both Angel and Beast also seem to hold a bit of a flame for the lone female member of the X-Men team, with Angel actually being pretty close at a few points to winning Jean's heart. But in one fateful panel, we'd even learn that Charles Xavier, yep, the professor, Jean's mentor and teacher, was also apparently in love with her. Maybe not as surprising at the time, but certainly not something you'd expect to look back on and see in retrospect if you are a fan of more modern comics or even stuff that was like the early 2000s, you know what I mean? Especially when we are later given the retconned origin of Professor X first meeting Jean when her powers first manifested as a child after the traumatic loss of her best friend Annie. Yeah, just makes it It's weird.
Wolverine cheers for the Calgary Flames. I know, I can't believe it either. Alberta kids, we have two choices growing up, the Oilers or the Flames, and this Edmonton girl argues that he picked the wrong side, not to throw stones from a glass house. In Wolverine First Class 6, Wolverine is tasked with babysitting on the night of the 7th game in the Stanley Cup playoffs. He's not missing it for a single flamin' thing. He is also featured in another panel eating donuts off his claws, and in my world, they are from Timmy's. Wolverine rightly claims that it's his moral right as a Canadian to watch hockey when he wants. It's what he does best. The X-Men are truly in another universe because I don't think the Calgary Flames were in the Stanley Cup playoffs in 2008, the year this comic dropped, or the year before, or the year after. In my very intense research about why Wolverine might be a Calgary Flames fan and not a fan of a good team, one particular Reddit comment caught my eye, and it's about Wolverine's healing factor. See, his healing factor helps him come back from pretty much anything, even regenerating from just a single drop of him. This user commented, "I'm sure having the ability to almost instantly heal from any wound helps you when you're a Flames fan." Not to start a hockey war, but facts are facts. I know I'm about to get cooked in the comments section, I know that, sorry.
When Cassandra Nova was first introduced in the comic, she was considered to be quite a mysterious figure. And I think that's why there were a lot of folks out there who were surprised when we learned of her origin. Now, as cool of a character as I feel like she is, her origin sure is super weird and super hard if you're just explaining it to someone who doesn't read comics. And in that way, I guess it's pretty unexpected. Although, as a comic book fan, I guess I found it less surprising than maybe some other folks would because, well, comics. Cassandra Nova was initially believed to be this mutant adjacent villain, yet kind of a very different being. She wasn't a human, but she wasn't exactly a mutant either, so what was she? Well, we later find out that she was in fact neither. She was a mummadry, that's a thing. The evil twin sister of Charles Xavier, who was born without a body and so replicated her brother's body kind of in the womb. As with all mummadry in regards to the Shi'ar's beliefs surrounding them, mummadry are basically like our evil anti-selves that manifest when we're first born and we gotta fight them to be born. Charles sensed that Cassandra was bad, battled her, and won in order to be born. But she was able to live on by sheer force, starting as a blob of cells in a sewer wall and eventually growing into the physical being that we'd all come to know. Seriously, that's her origin. Even more wild is the fact that this origin is actually unique to Cassandra. You see, not all mummadry can do this. She was only able to accomplish such a feat because of the genetic potential of her brother Charles. Even for a mummadry, it's weird, you know?
Everyone's favorite web-slinger was almost an X-Men. Spider-Man and the X-Men rarely team up, and X-Men 27 might explain why. Beast and Iceman find Spider-Man to ask if he wants to join the team. Spider-Man turns them down because he already turned down the Avengers at that point, plus he's super busy and he believes he's destined to work alone. He was still in his emo teen era. Spider-Man swings away before the X-Men pair can argue further. Maybe we don't see Spidey with the X-Men all that much anymore because they're still hurting from this interaction.
I know, I was certainly surprised by the ending to one of my favorite recent mutant team series, Hellions. In the final issue, issue number 18, the Hellions are forced to face the music after Orphan Maker is basically put on trial for breaking one of Krakoa's 3 governing laws. It's like the 3 things that they say on Krakoa, just don't do these things and you're cool. Ugh. As a result, Orphan Maker is sentenced to exile in the pit, and Nanny basically decides to go with him. It's all super heartbreaking. Thinking about it makes me want to cry. Now, the other members of the team are basically forced to disband by the council. Now directionless, they return to life even more dejected than they were at the beginning of the series, with none of them really feeling at home any longer on the mutant island nation of Krakoa. For a series about found family and purpose, it honestly ends on a very tragic note.
A man in the X-Men universe just recently gave birth to a space station. I'm as shocked as you are. Nothing in my life could have prepared me to say that sentence or explain it. So at the Hellfire Gala, something that Amanda actually talked about in part 1, a lot happens. Explosions and fighting and a birth. Monarch has reality warping powers and he's known to be an Omega level mutant, so he used his powers to impregnate himself with the space station to keep it safe. The station was Peak 7, later called Keep, and the station was used as a means of communication between Krakoa and Arakko, the 2 mutant islands we actually covered at the beginning.
This moment is so strange. I literally reacted to my thought about what I was about to say and I was like, man, this is a really weird one. It's really that weird, guys. Hold my hand because it's gonna get weird. This moment is so strange that it needs to just be mentioned. It needs to be immortalized in this video, so here we go. At the beginning of Uncanny X-Men issue number 178, we see Professor X reminiscing on the first student to join his X-Men team, Scott Summers. Cyclops had recently left the team to settle down with his new wife, Madeline Pryor, who looks exactly like Jean. You see, Scott had considered that she actually might be the reincarnation of Jean, but don't worry, we later find out she was actually Jean's clone, created by Mr. Sinister using a spark from the Phoenix. Professor X is reading a letter he's received from Scott detailing the events of his newlywed life, and it includes a picture of Scott. But not just Scott, it's Scott and Maddie in bed together. What? Not only is this a weird thing to send your teacher slash kind of pseudo father figure, but it's also weird in the sense that it makes you wonder, who took that photo? Number 10. The Fate of Squid Boy. Squid Boy and his friendship with Juggernaut was one of the redeeming elements of Chuck Austin's run on the X-Men, which is pretty widely disliked among fans of the X-Men. Austin's run is also the one that featured the relationship which was highly controversial between Husk and Angel. However, one of the things that was pretty cool about his run was how Juggernaut was brought into the book and somewhat redeemed. Juggernaut even befriended Sammy, known as Squid Boy, a young mutant who was ridiculed at school for his appearance and came to join the Xavier Institute. Squid Boy would save Juggernaut's life, and the two would become friends, with Kane even becoming like a father to Squid Boy, whose own father mistreated him as Kane's once had. Despite them both protecting one another, at one point Squid Boy stumbles upon a meeting that Juggernaut is attending with the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Gasp. Tragically, Squid Boy did not know that Juggernaut was acting as a double agent for the X-Men. Causing a scene and accusing Juggernaut of being a traitor, Black Tom Cassidy reacted by killing the young mutant. What an end to that initially sweet and uplifting story. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list, be sure to give it a like and let us know down below what you think one of the worst moments in X-Men history is, both in terms of controversy or just in terms of bad things that have happened to mutants. Number 9. Beast's not so subtle disguise. At one point, the X-Men get kidnapped and brainwashed by Mesmero, forced to join the circus. At the time, Hank wasn't even really with the X-Men, but was instead a member of the Avengers. But when he answers a call from the mutants and finds the X-Mansion deserted, he still of course looks for his fellow friends and former and future comrades. While searching, Beast decides to adopt a disguise. This is already after Beast is covered in bright blue fur, so what disguise does he go for? Trench coat and a hat. You got it. Even stranger, for the most part, his disguise actually works. It's only after his hat is removed that even the brainwashed X-Men seem to realize that there's something weird going on with his appearance. Don't worry though, despite the fact that Hank is kinda awful at disguises in this story, he's still a brilliant and dexterous fellow who is able to help save the X-Men in the end. Number 8. Avengers vs. X-Men. Avengers vs. X-Men pitted two superhero groups both known for doing massive good and saving the world on multiple, countless occasions really, against one another. How do you even make these two groups fight one another? Enter the Phoenix Force. Avengers and X-Men decide to take one another on because they disagree on what to do with the Phoenix Force, which is headed to Earth to merge with its current ideal host, Hope Summers, the mutant messiah. The X-Men want to protect Hope but also think the Phoenix could be useful, while the Avengers think the cosmic power is too dangerous and should be destroyed. All in all, Avengers vs. X-Men created a lot of problems, especially for the X-Men going forward. It also is a big part of the later split between Storm and Black Panther, who were actually married at the time. While the X-Men and mutant kind were at least mostly united in this front, although, Wolverine had some conflicting feelings of his own about it, Avengers vs. X-Men was also considered to be one of the greatest clashing of ideals since the first Civil War event from 2006. Number 7. Fox. Fox was one of the weirdest X-Men to have never really existed, and also was pretty creepy considering the move she put on Gambit. Fox attempted to seduce Gambit away from Rogue at a time when the couple were having some pretty intense intimacy problems. I mean, Rogue and Gambit have had intimacy problems physically for years in the comics, but I'm talking about intimacy on really all levels, including emotional intimacy. Emma Frost at the time was trying to provide a sort of couples counseling for them and offer them a free space psychically for them to connect romantically in ways they couldn't in the physical world at that time. Fox played on Gambit's struggles, flirting with him and offering herself physically to him. One, this was pretty messed up as Fox was actually a mutant student of his, and 2, it was really messed up because it was later revealed that Fox actually wasn't a student at all, didn't really exist, but was actually Rogue's adoptive mother Mystique in disguise, who didn't believe that Gambit was good enough for her daughter and later claimed to have been testing Gambit. Number 6. Cyclops kills Professor X. Now granted, this also happened as a result of the Avengers vs. X-Men story arc. Cyclops ended up killing Professor X because he was possessed by the Phoenix Force and ultimately had so much power with him that it basically corrupted him. But this was also not a great time for Professor X in comic book history, so even if you disagree with Cyclops' actions here, and I think most people do, I think you can at least understand why this happened. This was following a time where many dark truths about Xavier and his lies to the X-Men were unearthed. Among them was the sentience of the Danger Room, itself an AI cyborg mutant, as well as the revelation in Deadly Genesis that Xavier had sent Moira McTaggart's mutant team into Krakoa only for them to perish. Quote unquote perish. A truth which Vulcan forced the professor to confess. Professor X was on a path of redemption at the time of his death at the hands, or rather optic blasts, of Cyclops, but he was still overshadowed by a pretty dark time in his own history. Number 5. Meet Daddy Nightcrawler. Probably one of the weirdest storylines we have ever had in comics happens to be one where we learned about the truth behind who Nightcrawler's father was. Did we need to know this? Did we really care about this? I mean, Kurt already had an adoptive family who are admittedly pretty cool, and he's got Mystique for a mom, which might not be as cool in terms of like Mystique being a good mom, but it's definitely interesting. But we also, I guess, had to give him a dad to help explain even more the way Nightcrawler looks and his powers. In a storyline where demonic mutants known as Neophim were pitted against angelic mutants known as Cheophim, implying that mutants are related to both heaven and hell, or at least some of them are, we learned that Azazel is a powerful, satanic-like demonic being who was actually Nightcrawler's father, and had only sired him in an attempt to free himself and his fellow Neophim from the Brimstone dimension where they were trapped. Number 4. Necrosha. The massacre at Genosha, which we talked about on part 1, was really bad. But even worse, it also paved the way for another tragic event when Necrosha happened. Tragic, scary, Necrosha's a lot of things. Necrosha was when Selene of the Externals, not to be confused with Marvel's Eternals, who are a totally different thing, decided to make her home base the devastated Genosha. Selene ended up taking control of all the dead left on Genosha, resurrecting them, and utilizing them as an undead army to attack the new mutant island of Utopia. Yeah, it was pretty bad. Not only does Selene seek to get revenge on the X-Men either, and also conquer Utopia, but her plan here is to basically become a bona fide goddess who would be pretty dangerous and scary indeed. Number 3. Inferno from 2021. During the most recent Inferno event, a lot of truths were unearthed about the true allegiances of those who came together to create Krakoa, and just exactly who was behind the whole mutant island paradise. Now, we already knew that story, but not all mutants, in fact not many mutants, did. The truth was that the idea of what Krakoa is was founded by Magneto and Professor X, as well as their ally and friend Moira McTaggart, who we recently found out during the House of X series was actually a mutant. Moira claimed she wanted to help her fellow mutants, but in reality she planned to actually end mutant kind, which is what's revealed in Inferno. But instead of destroying them, she wanted to disguise her destruction in the guise of a mutant paradise, kind of giving them like one last hurrah as they would eventually die out, as per her plan. During Inferno, Moira's betrayal was brought to light, and she was exiled from Krakoa. Number 2. Mutant Massacre. Now sometimes referred to as the Morlock Massacre, but back in the day it was simply known as the Mutant Massacre. This was before massive mutant attacks like Genosha ever happened, which is also what made this so much more shocking and horrible at the time. Although it happened on a smaller scale, the Mutant Massacre happened when Mr. Sinister in essence ordered the Morlocks be eradicated. He sent his team of marauders to handle them and attack, killing many who lived down in the sewers. It was, as it is called, a mutant massacre. For those unfamiliar, the Morlocks are less pretty mutants basically, ones who have dramatic physical mutations which often make it impossible for them to walk among humans on the surface world, at least without going unnoticed. So they tend to stick to their own kind and the sewers. Think the sewer mutants from Futurama, it's kind of what they're like. Morlocks, as such, sometimes are considered more antagonistic mutants who resent the mutants sometimes who are able to walk freely among men. Now, not all Morlocks are like that, and in reality, for the most part, they're actually peaceful and innocent folks who have been even more ostracized and rejected from the world than most other mutants. So it definitely didn't deserve to be massacred. It was really awful. Number 1, M-Day. M-Day has to have been one of the worst moments in mutant history. Although I actually gave Genosha the top spot on my part 1 of this list, that's because, I mean, I pretty much always talk about M-Day, we don't usually talk about Genosha, and I wanted to save that for a potential part 2, which I figured was coming, and here it is. Decimation is by far one of the worst things to have ever happened to mutant kind. Genosha simply doesn't get enough acknowledgement because it ended up being overshadowed by the devastation of M-Day, which happened only a few years later, with M-Day happening in 2005 and the massacre at Genosha happening in 2001. M-Day happened as a result of Scarlet Witch striking out at mutant kind after the events of House of M, where she attempted to create a reality where many heroes were happy, but after learning of its falseness, was once again rejected by all those she had basically tried to help. Namely though, Wanda was striking out at her then to be believed father, Magneto, who she claimed loved mutant kind more than he did his own family. Wanda said the words "no more mutants," and with that small utterance depowered or destroyed millions of mutants the world over. X-Men know brutality, whether through the emotional loss of a team member, the decimation of millions, or just the gruesome brutality of a fight. Mutants truly have experienced it all. The end of the Hellion series has to be one of the most brutal things I've ever read. It was actually painful for me to read. My heart seriously hurt after finishing that series, and I was in tears for honestly most of the last issue. To watch this team of lovable but extremely weird misfits come together over multiple issues throughout this series, only to see many of them slip and self-destruct, was honestly something else. They had found a sense of family, only to lose that newfound family, and with it, for many of them, honestly their sense of hope. It was a brutal ending to what was otherwise honestly an uplifting story. I still can't believe that's how it ended, honestly. Zeb Wells out here just playing with my emotions, playing with my heart. I think the worst character for me in terms of how the story ended for them was honestly Wildchild, who basically decided to just accept that he didn't really belong anywhere and submitted to being in a medicated stupor. It really was tragic. What stories have moved you emotionally? For me, Wildchild's and the Hellions ending overall just literally brought me to tears. I actually struggled to read the pages. That's how much I was crying at the end of this series. It was really heartbreaking and really brutal. This is a traumatic one, or at least it probably was a traumatic one for Wolverine at least. Yep, we're talking about that moment. The moment when Wolverine was permanently separated from his adamantium. What are we talking about here? Divorce, babe. Divorce. Wolverine was divorced basically here from his adamantium, something that initially in the comics was suggested to be part of his mutant power. However, over time, of course, we'd come to learn that the adamantium-coated skeleton that he had, his claws, was not necessarily inherent, but was instead put in place by Weapon X. He did have claws, but they were just bone claws, and then Weapon X basically modified him and coated his whole skeleton in adamantium. When the X-Men faced off against Magneto in space, Magneto used his magnetic mutant powers to manipulate this metallic substance, this adamantium, fully removing it from Wolverine's skeleton. He'd get it back, but the extremely gruesome and painful de-adamantium process would leave its mark, making Wolverine more animalistic soon afterwards. Professor X has a lot of brutal moments in the comics. Honestly, he is tied to many of them because he has done some morally questionable things throughout his comic book history. One of these moments, however, might seem small in comparison to some larger missteps that he's had, but it still shocks me to this day, and I find it honestly quite brutal in a different way, so I'm gonna include it here. We're talking about Professor X admitting his feelings for Jean Grey. This wasn't something that Professor X shared aloud, but just seeing it confessed to, even in a thought bubble, was honestly enough for me. Now granted, at the time, I doubt this would have been as shocking when this comic was released, because it was issue number 3 of X-Men, considering that canon had not yet established that Jean was actually one of the Professor's really first X-Men, who he'd helped when she was only a little kid and he was a young adult. But given the context I had when I read this, yeah, it's a mess. One of the most brutal fights I've seen in a while is the one where Storm faces off against Tarn. Tarn the Uncaring is one of the mutants from Morocco, and he happens to be one of the most upsetting to face. Honestly, because of his mutant powers. Also, he's a mutant of Morocco, so they tend to be made of just tougher stuff in general. But really what makes his fights in general brutal are, honestly, his powers. Tarn can basically alter folks' genetic makeup, which is exactly what he does to take Storm's powers away after after challenging her to a fight, or rather, after insulting her authority as regent of Arakko, which she interprets basically as a challenge. And honestly, rightfully so. She responds in kind by saying she will see him in the circle for the two of them to duke it out between them for who should sit as regent, or rather, maybe just like who should respect who. Now, when they do, Tarn uses his powers to take away Storm's powers and disfigure her, but still she manages to best him by stabbing him in the chest and threatening to end his life by puncturing his heart. Yeah, Storm, even when she doesn't have powers, she's a really amazing fighter, so you should not mess with her. She forces him to yield, and in the end he learns just how strong-willed Storm is and ultimately returns her powers to her, admitting she is of Arakko and perhaps she might even be of a Menth. That's how intense she is. I was not expecting this next one, which is quite a twist, or rather I wouldn't have been expecting it if I hadn't read it later. 2023 for me was a year of mainly focusing on indie comics in terms of my collection, seeing if I could make it like a whole year without really collecting mainly superhero comics from the big two myself, instead focusing on collecting books from smaller or still large but honestly alternative publishers. Dynamite, Image, IDW, and even still some like really indie like self-published stuff. For the most part, I succeeded in last year's New Year's resolution. Yay, in regards to this, but the downside was I ended up being more behind on my big two superhero stuff, like X-Men. As such, I already kind of knew the events of the Hellfire Gala before I actually read that Hellfire Gala. Even knowing it though, it was still shocking to behold Nimrod flying in and pretty much insta-killing, for the most part, the newly announced X-Men team. Honestly, poor Dazzler. I was so excited about Dazzler joining that team, and then when I heard that that happened, I was like, ah. And then when I read it, I was like, ah. Contrary to the last point, this one was very unexpected. Obviously with Hellfire Gala, I kind of already knew what happened even though I hadn't read it yet. This one caught me unawares. It's because it was one of the first fights that we saw during the Ten of Swords Otherworld tournament, and I honestly had expectations going into this event that were instantly shattered here. Pardon my pun there. Sorry, Betsy. In this first fight of the tournament, Captain Britain's Betsy Braddock was forced to face off against Arakko's champion, Iska the Unbeaten. Iska gets her name from her mutant powers, which prevent her from ever losing. And while I expected that Betsy might be the first one to, pull off such a feat and make Iska lose, since she was the hero in this scenario and Iska, at the time, was the villain, it turns out I was wrong. And true to her name, Iska made short work of Betsy, literally shattering her into thousands of pieces. Yeah, I didn't see that one coming. I feel like Wait, What Just Happened pretty much sums up Ten of Swords as an event. It's just bonkers. Bonkers, I think, in a good way, but that's my opinion. Another battle that I wasn't expecting to go how it did was the one with Uranos versus, well, pretty much all of Arakko, to be honest. But more specifically for this point, I'm talking about the Eternals villain facing off against Magneto, who is of course usually a villain of the X-Men, but in X-Men Red is really more of a hero here. Magneto here seemingly holds his own at first, but in the end has his heart removed by Uranos and is left for dead. It's also a pretty quick fight. It's like brutally quick. It's a seemingly gruesome end for a long-standing character, but what's even more intense is it would shortly after, in the same issue, be revealed that Magneto was so committed to getting revenge here, so willful, that he refused to die, using his powers in place of his heart to move his blood through his body and will himself to keep going so he could live to get revenge on Uranos for what he had done to mutant kind and planet Arakko. Heartless Magneto is scary Magneto. This death of a character I'm about to touch upon, though, is an honest real one. Synch was long dead up until recently in the comics. Thankfully, he was one of the first that the mutant nation of Krakoa brought back, prioritizing his resurrection so that he might be acclimatized and prepared for his mission in the Vault, alongside Darwin and Laura Kinney's Wolverine. Before his mission there, however, which he miraculously survived, he gave his life to protect others when Emma Frost's school for young mutants was attacked. This was his previous death. Tragic. Generation X, let's go. What makes his death in Generation X even more brutal is the fact that Synch gave his life to basically save other human kids who also attended the school, even though many of the human kids there were pretty unkind to the mutant student body they were forced to share the school with. Another heartbreaking defeat that I found to be extremely shocking and brutal was the loss of Captain Kate Pryde. And Lockheed, poor Lockheed, though fortunately Lockheed, his life was not lost. We must protect Lockheed at all costs. This all went down in the first volume of Marauders, a series that constantly pushed the envelope, I felt, for what we expect of these characters, while also staying true to them. Kate was the leader of this new Marauders team, making her pretty much the main character of the series, so seeing her lost at sea at the hands of Sebastian Shaw was devastating, especially when you consider this happened only in issue 6 of this series. Yeah, just taking everything we thought we knew about what was going on and flipping the script. While a lot of the times we talk about the events of House of M and M-Day as being like the worst things mutants have ever lived through, there was a moment that was even more a brutal loss for Marvel mutants in comparison, I'd wager. One that also cost millions of lives. Millions of lives. I think actually M-Day only cost million, and not even lives, just depowering individuals, but in this case, these people were wiped off the face of the earth. Cassandra Nova returned to get her revenge and ended up killing Donald Trask III in one of the most disturbing ways I've ever seen in a comic, while also merging with him, able to use his voice after his death to command the Master Mold and Sentinels. During the E is for Extinction story, Nova unleashed these Sentinels on Genosha, resulting in what we refer to today as the Genoshan Massacres, which cost mutant kind an estimated 16 million lives. Yeah. Doing far more damage than M-Day and making M-Day even more devastating as a result when it did happen, since the mutants' numbers were already severely reduced going into the House of M event because of course, the Genoshan Massacre. Like, if the Genoshan Massacre hadn't have happened, we would have had more mutants even after M-Day, because there'd just be more people in general. So even though many of them would have been depowered, we still would have had a lot left.
At number 10 is X-Men versus the Sentinels. Now, typically the X-Men can make quick work of the Sentinels, but not in this case, because this particular Sentinel seems to be about as OP as the Marvel vs. Capcom character. The X-Men had one heck of a showdown against these Sentinels in Uncanny X-Men number 142. The dystopian future where these massive, terrifying Sentinels wreak havoc. It's like the end of the line for the X-Men, as these villains are that intense. What really hits hard is when one of these guys takes out Wolverine with this insane energy blast. I mean, Brutal doesn't even cover it, as Wolverine's flesh is just seared clean off his skin. It's like a major gut punch for the whole team and fans too. And get this whole stark future hinges on the demise of a single US senator. But hold up, here's the kicker. Kitty Pryde then swoops in and does that time traveling stuff, stopping that senator's assassination, and that move might have just saved the day and changed everything. At number 9 is Cyclops versus Wolverine. Cyclops and Wolverine are two big names in the X-Men world, and they clashed in a very brutal showdown. It wasn't just a regular argument either, it was a full-on fight. See, they've always had this tension, especially when it comes to Jean Grey, with that little love triangle there, but things got out of hand in Schism. See, Cyclops with his eye-blasting powers went all out against Wolverine. He didn't hold back firing those optic blasts at him, who in return fought back with everything he had. Now, Cyclops is way more powerful, but Wolverine's ability to heal kept him going. This fight wasn't just about powers, but it was personal. Both dudes were full of rage and super intense. Imagine these two heavy hitters just going at it, not stopping until they were both worn out. One of the moments that make you go, whoa, that really just happened? If you're enjoying the video so far, you could support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to the Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. At number 8 is Professor X vs. Magneto. Professor X and Magneto had their fair share of epic clashes, but one particular showdown left jaws on the floor. In X-Men number 25, things got seriously intense, as Magneto had gone on a full rampage, ripping every bit of adamantium off of Wolverine's skeleton. Yeah, all that indestructible stuff, all gone. It almost ended Wolverine and shook the X-Men to their core. But then it gets even more intense, because Magneto just didn't stop there, causing devastation and taking the lives of hundreds of innocent people. And that's when Professor X snapped. In a shocking move, Professor X did the unthinkable, erasing Magneto's mind. Imagine wiping someone's memories clean. That's basically what happened. This clash between the two mutants took a brutal turn, pushing even the most devoted X-Men fans to question the limits of right and wrong in their epic battles. And number 3 is Wolverine versus Sabretooth. In the world of X-Men, Wolverine and Sabretooth are known for their intense clashes, but their brawl in Wolverine number 10 probably takes the cake. Their rage-fueled showdown kicks off when Wolverine discovers that Sabretooth unalived his beloved Silver Fox. What follows is an all-out War, a brutal melee where both mutants unleash their full ferocity. Wolverine, driven by grief and fury, goes berserk. It's a visceral display of raw power as he tears into Sabretooth with an almost primal intensity. But it doesn't end there. Sabretooth, equally savage, retaliates with a barrage of his own vicious attacks. Now the mind-blowing part is despite the brutality, both of their mutant healing abilities kept them going. Limbs torn, bodies shredded, but neither of them gave an inch. It was a relentless clash that pushes the boundaries of their endurance, leaving us stunned at the sheer intensity of the battle. And number 6 is Galactus versus Rachel Summers. There's this epic showdown that just kept minds blown in X-Men. Picture this, Rachel Summers goes head to head against Galactus, the ginormic cosmic entity with a serious hunger for planets. Now this clash happens in Excalibur 61, and let me tell you, it's next level. Rachel stumbles upon Galactus as he's gearing up to snack on a planet, and what unfolds is a colossal battle, pun intended, that's both visually stunning and totally out of this world. The artist pulls out all the stops, making each punch, every display of power feel like a seismic event. It's like watching fireworks as Rachel, fueled by the Phoenix Force, takes on this colossal force of nature. The sheer scale of their fight, the raw power on display, is enough to leave you wide-eyed and jaw-dropped. The showdown isn't just brutal, it's a cosmic clash of epic proportions. At number 5 is the Dark Phoenix versus the X-Men. In Uncanny X-Men number 135, things got intense when Jean Grey turned into the Dark Phoenix. She went all out against her own pals, the X-Men. Jean Grey morphs a tree into solid gold, squashing Colossus underneath it, and then turning him back into a regular human. Storm, who usually gives a tough fight, faces brutal psychic attacks from Jean. And the rest of the gang, she tosses them aside as if they're feathers. It's pretty wild because the X-Men, who are usually the team fighting for good, end up facing one of their own at her most powerful and uncontrollable state. This moment shows how even heroes like X-Men deal with some seriously tough challenges, especially when the threat comes from within your own ranks. At number 4, Jean Grey versus Emma Frost. You see, this all started when Jean Grey found out that Emma's been sort of messing around with Scott Summers, who's Jean's partner. Talk about drama. And this isn't your regular superhero fight, it goes way deeper. Jean's anger pushes her to use her psychic powers to delve into Emma's mind, making her relive all of her worst memories, like a mental battlefield way more brutal than just throwing punches. Now this whole clash ripped apart the relationship between Cyclops, Scott, and Jean Grey. Pretty heavy fallout. And it's not just about punches and kicks, it was emotions and consequences that go way beyond the fight itself. And at number 3 is Colossus versus the Marauders. Amidst the chaotic clashes of the X-Men, one gripping moment that stands out is the clash between Colossus and the Marauders. This event shook the pages of Marvel Comics during the fall of the Mutant Saga. See, the Marauders, fueled by their sheer malice, brought devastation upon innocent Morlocks hiding beneath New York City. The intensity reached its peak in Uncanny X-Men number 211 when Colossus faced off against Riptide, a member of the Marauders. The Marauders' callousness, coupled with their harm to Nightcrawler and Kitty Pryde, pushed Colossus beyond his breaking point. Now, Colossus is usually known for his gentle nature despite his immense strength, but this time he was driven to an unprecedented act, ending Riptide's life. This shocking moment showcased the depths of despair and anger that the X-Men faced in their fight for justice and peace. At number 2 is Wolverine versus the Hellfire Club. In Uncanny X-Men number 133, Wolverine faces off against the Hellfire Club goons in a defining moment for the character. This showdown helped establish Wolverine as a force to be reckoned with. Now, even though this one wasn't as graphic as later battles, it showcased his ruthless nature. Throughout the clash, Wolverine takes down the goons one by one, displaying his sheer ferocity and skill. Each takedown ramps up the tension as the Hellfire Club members witness their comrades failing to Wolverine's relentless attacks. This scene wasn't just about the physical fight, it highlighted Wolverine's reputation as someone not to be trifled with. The intensity of this battle solidified Wolverine's place as one of the most formidable and iconic members of the X-Men. It set the stage for his future confrontations, marking a pivotal moment in the character's history. And coming in at number 1 is Psylocke versus Wolverine. In the world of Marvel Comics, Psylocke and Wolverine had some intense showdowns. Now, one particular brawl in Uncanny X-Men number 258 was a standout. Psylocke, known for her martial arts prowess, showcased her skills against the formidable Wolverine. Now, despite Wolverine's super strength, speed, and adamantium claws, and extensive combat expertise, Psylocke swiftly outmaneuvered him. She executed precisely six moves that had to leave Wolverine reeling, and then, adding a final blow, she unleashed her Psychic Blade, a powerful weapon unique to the X-Men. Now this clash wasn't about the physical strength, but also about strategy and Psylocke's exceptional skills. It's a reminder that in the world of mutants, raw power isn't always the deciding factor in a fight. Psylocke's combination of martial arts and psychic prowess made this one of the most memorable, most intense battles in all of X-Men history.
Number 10. Hulk Smash? X-Men? This happened during World War Hulk. Hulk had been sent to Sakaar and believed that the Illuminati were not only responsible for sending him off-world, but also for destroying the planet that he had made his new home and his future family there as well. Coming back to Earth and pissed, he began to hunt down all members of the Illuminati, including those who weren't even at the meeting. Enter Charles Xavier. While Charles was not one of the members to condemn the Hulk as he was not in attendance, Hulk still wanted to know what Charles would have voted had he been there. Charles told him the truth, that he also would have voted to send Hulk off-world. Hulk wanted to hold Charles accountable for what he saw as his potential crimes, since, Charles didn't actually vote, but before he could take him away, the X-Men stepped in to defend the professor. Hulk then began to beat down any and all mutants or allies who would stand in his way. It was a slaughter. All this despite the fact that Charles wasn't even there, and these mutants really didn't have a say in the matter of Hulk being sent off-world to begin with. In the end, Hulk was shamed into stopping his attack and leaving Xavier be by the mutant Mercury. Thank goodness. Number 9. Schism. Schism isn't necessarily a bad idea on paper, but it was one of the darkest moments in X-Men history, so in a way it was the worst for the mutants themselves, in terms of in-canon, as opposed to, us readers. What went down here? Well, Cyclops and Wolverine fought and created a huge split down the middle between mutant kind, especially mutant students, as each had their own beliefs when it came to as how best to shape these young minds. What might seem odd about Schism is that it was about a divide between Psych and Wolvie, who are not really known for being super friendly anyways, due to their infighting about, who should get a date Jean Grey. However, it should also be noted that Cyclops and Wolverine, despite both loving Jean, are actually considered to be pretty close and are good friends. That is until they get into a disagreement about how best to teach young mutants. Like I said, they've gotten into a lot of disagreements before that, but this one was pretty big. Wolverine thinks that they should be treated as kids, and Cyclops thinks they should be trained as soldiers. What makes it worse is just as a Sentinel attacks the mutant island of Utopia, Cyclops and Wolverine decided to fight one another over the differentiating standpoints as opposed to dealing with the Sentinels, which is, I know you guys are having a fight, but like a Sentinel's attacking? I feel like we should deal with that first. Number 8. Cyclops recruits X-23 for X-Force. X-Force is a team that is sometimes referred to as the X-Men Black Ops team. They go in and do the jobs that others are not willing to do. The more shady and morally questionable heroic stuff. X-Force originally started as Cable's team that went around dealing with situations and taking out people that basically Cable thought needed to be handled. But from there would evolve into a secret X-Men team that handled assassinations and less desirable jobs. At one point, it's Cyclops who puts the team together during the mutants' time on Utopia. He appoints Wolverine the leader, but also puts X-23 on the team against Logan's wishes. This is because X-23, Laura Kinney, has only known killing pretty much her whole life. She was made to be a weapon, and Logan wanted her to have a say moving forward in what she did with her life. He didn't want her to have to feel like she always had to be a weapon. She could be more than that. But Cyclops feels she's too useful to not have on the team. Needless to say, it was not a good look for Psych, and Logan was pretty pissed. Number 7. The first live-action Juggernaut. While the version of Juggernaut from the Deadpool franchise appears relentless in a really great way, the first attempt at the character on screen was not so great. Even the actor that played Juggernaut in the Fox X-Men franchise, Vinnie Jones, appearing in X-Men The Last Stand, supposedly claimed he was even disappointed with the portrayal as well. The problem with this version of Juggy was that he wasn't really intimidating enough. Also, that outfit. I don't think it works great on camera. If it weren't for the Juggernaut's displays of easily smashing through walls, I feel like we'd have a hard time recognizing him here, even with him clearly stating who he is to the audience while he's in pursuit of Kitty Pryde. Number 6. Inhumans vs. X-Men. Possibly one of the weirdest storylines we've ever gotten, especially as Inhumans were kind of attempted to be utilized before in the comics to be like a backup to the X-Men. Not saying I don't love the Inhumans, by the way, but after Marvel sold the rights of the X-Men to Fox, blocks, they basically made an attempt to kind of catapult the Inhumans into popularity, and that really just didn't work out too well. The Inhumans were made by the Kree and were modified humans who basically get powers through a process called Terrigenesis, where they're exposed to Terrigen mists. They usually keep to themselves, so to have them fight any mutant group feels kinda weird straight out of the gate. The reasoning between them and the X-Men having beef? Well, it turns out that apparently Terrigen mists are like poison to mutant kind, and despite the Inhumans attempting to work things out and come to some kind of peaceful resolution when mutant kind were accidentally hurt by mists released on Earth because they actually felt pretty bad about it, the two groups ended up in a war. What makes it even worse is that the catalyst for this war, the dramatic death of Cyclops at the hands, or rather the voice, of Black Bolt, is revealed to have been staged by Emma Frost to give mutants a reason to fight back against a group that never really wanted to fight to begin with. So what are we even talking about here? Number 5. Cyclops and Emma Frost make out on Jean Grey's grave. Oh boy. Yeah, there are a lot of things that have not been great when it comes to Cyclops' history. Sorry, Cyclops. I love you, Scott, but you do some questionable things, man. I mean, he's done a lot of good things, but he's also been part of some of the biggest scandals in all of mutant history. Case in point, his psychic affair with Emma Frost, and following that, his making out on Jean's grave with Emma after Jean had died. Wolverine certainly was not impressed with any of this. While many still ship and love Cyclops and Emma together, even many of the fans of the couple would agree it was a pretty weird moment. However, Jean's ghost gave the couple her blessing, so I guess we're just supposed to be cool with it. I mean, I guess if Jean's ghost is fine with it, then we're just supposed to be like, yeah, alright, why not? Make out on that grave. You guys are in love. It's cool. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to see a part 2, because you know there's a lot of terrible things that have happened in X-Men history, please be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 4. Professor X and Jean Grey. In particular, Professor X's initial feelings about Jean back in the Stan Lee, Jack Kirby days of the X-Men. We all know that Cyclops, aka Scott Summers, has always had a thing for Jean, but when it comes to the classic X-Men team, he actually wasn't the only one. In fact, pretty much everyone was head over heels for Jean at one point. Maybe except Bobby, who back in the day did like to flirt, but mainly was in love with ice cream. I mean, Bobby was the youngest of the bunch, and even me, not necessarily being the youngest of any bunch, I still love ice cream, so fair enough, Bobby. You eat that ice cream. Both Angel and Beast also seem to hold a bit of a flame for the lone female member of the X-Men team at that time, with Angel actually being pretty close at times to winning Jean's heart. But that's not where it ended. Even Charles Xavier, Jean's mentor and teacher, was apparently in love with her? Why is this so bad? While at the time the X-Men came across as more young adults at times than teenagers, in retrospect it would be established that Charles, as a grown man, had come to Jean's aid when her powers first manifested and shielded her from them with mental blocks to protect her from basically the sheer power that would otherwise probably have destroyed her. So she was maybe 8 or 10, I think, when this happened, and he was an adult? Okay. Add in the fact that even back in the 60s run, Charles was her professor and Jean was his student, and the fact that Professor X chiefly blamed his lack of ability to walk as a reason why he couldn't, nay shouldn't, be with Jean, and it's all kinda weird and pretty gross. Look, Charles, you don't have to walk for people to love you, but also don't have crushes on your students, it's weird. Number 3. Archangel and Husk. One of the strangest relationships to have ever existed in the X-Books. One of. Or at the very least, one of the most controversial was the one between Archangel and Husk. Why was it considered so weird? Well, Angel was one of the first ever X-Men on the original team back in the 60s. Now, time works weird in comics, I'll grant you that, but Husk was known to be the younger sister of Cannonball, who himself was a much later addition to the X-Men, first appearing almost 20 years after Angel on the New Mutants team in 1982. And Husk, Paige Guthrie, his younger sister, appeared 2 years later in 1984. She was believed to be in her late teens or maybe her early 20s, while Angel, although somewhat ageless, would likely be in his 30s at least, if not older, because yeah, he was around in the 60s, so we gotta do some fixing to make that make sense. And it was implied that he was quite a bit older throughout their relationship as well, just in the comics, in the context of the relationship and what they would say to each other. Add in the fact that these two got busy in the sky above the Guthrie family home, and yeah, you can see why this feels really problematic and weird. Number 2. X-Men Gold Controversy. Oh boy, the X-Men Gold Controversy. X-Men Gold was actually a series that many X-Men fans were really excited for at the time. It promised a fresh, new take on X-Men the fans were craving, but when it came out, the first issue's release was swept up in a whirlwind of controversy in regards to its first printing. This was because the artist, Ardian Syaf, who was said to have hidden political symbolism in the issue, which directly related to a protest in Indonesia against the Christian governor of Jakarta, known as Ahok. Overall, the protest was considered to be quite conservative in regards to political sides, and those protesting Ahok wanted him jailed for being a blasphemer when he referred to a passage in the Quran during his campaign. Now, he apologized for doing so, but people were still really angry about it, and Syaf was supposedly among those at the protest and decided to include the political and religiously charged numbers in the first issue of the book, which are also said to stand for a passage that is interpreted in Indonesia speaking against accepting Jews or Christians as Muslim leaders. So even though apparently there were a lot of things that were misconstrued with all of that, it still was just not great. It's not great. Number 1. Genoshan Mutant Massacre. The history of Genosha has pretty much been tumultuous and widely awful since the start. The island nation prospered for most of its history thanks to mutants who were born there and once identified had their free will stripped of them, all their rights taken away, and were basically used as free laborers for the benefit of the nation, no longer being considered citizens but the property of the Genoshan government once they were identified as mutants. Pretty terrible stuff. Eventually, the mutants on the island would rise up with some help, but even after that, it would not be easy to set things right. There was a lot of fighting that happened on Genosha even after the mutants were kind of trying to get their rights back. At one point, Magneto got ownership of the island nation and attempted to turn it into a nation for mutant kind, a place mutants could call their own, reclaiming it and turning it into a little slice of paradise for them. An attempt at what we have kind of with Krakoa today. Hopefully it ends better for Krakoa though. For Genosha, millions of mutants were murdered on the island after it was attacked by Cassandra Nova's Wild Sentinels. It was a brutal and dark moment in mutant history, with the island being put on quarantine so that even those who did survive and tried to get away were ordered to be shot on sight. A lot of people like to focus on House of M and M-Day, but Genosha was a mass extinction mutant event, and it was a really brutal attack. Number 10. Return of Strife. Strife ended up reappearing in the Cable series, which saw its final issue in 2021. Honestly, this series was also surprisingly another of my favorites from the current line. I saw the team up of two of my favorite creators in comics, Phil Noto on art and Jerry Dugan writing. An all-star team to be sure. Eventually, Strife was the one revealed to be behind the kidnapping of mutant babies, and quickly became the main villain of the story and series, which both Kid Cable, or Young Cable, and his older self, Old Cable, had to team up to face. Strife is back, baby! And also he's got babies. Number 9. End of X Factor. While so many of these series have been praised and enjoyed by X-Men and Marvel fans everywhere, a new era of X-Men was also born from Jonathan Hickman and his creative team, breathing new life into mutant kind and reinventing and tweaking a lot of even the established history. While they did create a lot of series, sadly some of these did have to be cancelled to make place for a even newer era that is headed our way, as the status quo will once again be somewhat shaken up. Though not as dramatically as was done during the Dawn of X era with the House of X and Powers of 10 series. X Factor was one of the series that did end, however, which, like many of the other series that also ended, was so bittersweet. Some of the members are moving on, like Polaris, who joins the new X-Men team, and Daken, aka Akahiro, who seems to be recruited for the Marauders team, while others will stick around. But while X-Factor may still exist on Krakoa, it was time to say goodbye when it came to their team book. Goodbye. At least for now anyways. For my own heart, the end of this series was a pretty big moment, so I don't know if you were there with me or if you were following along with X Factor, but whew, this book gave me feels. And friends, before I move on to the next spot, if you are loving this list, goodness knows a lot more happened in 2021 when it comes to the X-Men and all the X books, so be sure to let us know you love it, and I'm happy to give you a part 2. Honestly, there's so many things, I don't even know if 3 parts would be enough. Everything has changed. Number 8. Death of the Shadow King. In New Mutants, we saw an interesting turn in the series when we got two different New Mutants teams. The classic older New Mutants, who were often dealing with bigger missions out in the world or out in space, and a team of New Mutants who were seemingly brought together by the Shadow King and pretty much operated exclusively on Krakoa. It seemed initially like the Shadow King might also be turning over a new leaf on Krakoa, but the truth of his nature was revealed when he ended up killing Gabby Kidney, aka Scout. However, the New Mutants would find out about his treachery and sought to defeat the Shadow King once and for all. And they actually succeeded, with the Shadow King dying but leaving Amal Farouk alive, which meant that he was finally free of the Shadow King's influence. Pretty big stuff. Number 7. Hellions disband. One of the saddest moments came near the end of 2021 when it came to big X-book related moments. We got this one and everyone's favorite somewhat underdog of a series, Hellions. In the final issue, issue 18, the Hellions are forced to face the music after Orphan Maker is put on trial for breaking one of Krakoa's 3 major rules. As a result, Orphan Maker is sentenced to exile in the pit and Nanny decides to go with him. The other members of the team are forced to disband by the council. Now directionless, they return to life even more dejected than when they began, with none of them really feeling at home any longer on the mutant island nation of Krakoa. So sad. It's a bittersweet milestone. Hopefully though, we'll continue to see more of these characters' journeys, or possibly see this roster of the Hellions reform at some point in the future. Hopefully. I want the Hellions to come back together. They're such a good team. Oh no. And just as they were all getting to work together and like become a real team, that's of course when it ends. Of course. Number 6. A sleeper agent infiltrates the Quiet Council. If you've been keeping up with Inferno, you know near the end of last year in issue 2 of that special event series, we saw Colossus join the Quiet Council. Now, if you haven't been keeping up with the X-Force though, you might have missed the significance of this. It's pretty significant. That's right, Colossus is no longer seemingly in control of his body and seems to have become a sleeper agent in the pages of X-Force. Russia's mutants for a long while have been working to take over Colossus and turn him into their own agent, and it seems in issue 24 of X-Force that they were finally successful, even getting him to kill his own new potential romantic partner, Gala, who he seemed to care for dearly, and who was also trying to help him recover from trauma. No! Not good. And now he's on the Quiet Council. Number 5. Jonathan Hickman announces he's leaving. Jonathan Hickman will be on his way out the X door at Marvel Comics this year in 2022. But it was actually announced in 2021 that he would be leaving his creative position as head of X, which was when many of us reacted with, I think, some shock and some worry over the future of the X books that we'd come to fall in love with all over again over the past few years, since Hickman helped to revitalize the X-Men narrative and mutant kind, helping to build the mutant island nation of Krakoa we've all come to know and love. Hickman had plans for the X-Men, but they were to go off in 3 acts. The Rise with Dawn of X, the Reign with Reign of X, and following that we would have had the Fall. However, apparently Hickman's creative team were actually interested in continuing the narrative as opposed to ending it with that final chapter. Because of this, Hickman decided that he would take a step back and trust the team that he'd built to take over for him, creating and continuing with their own vision. Exciting, but nerve-wracking stuff a little bit. However, considering we've gotten a look at some of the titles to come, I'm both a little sad but mainly still excited at this point. There's lots of good stuff heading our way. It will be sad to see Hickman leave, but there are still plenty of stories waiting to be told that we have to look forward to in his absence. And I also can't wait to see what Hickman does next. So that's also awesome. He's gonna go do something else and I'm gonna be like, now this is cool, and now you're gonna go do something else that's cool that I need to check out. It's great. Number 4. Hellfire Gala. The Hellfire Gala was probably one of the most anticipated mutant events in the last decade. It had the effect of making me wish I could myself attend in person, and coveting my virtual reading invite to attend via all the books that would have a Hellfire Gala issue tie-in. I even almost ordered a dress for this event. Well, I mean, I did order a dress, but it actually ran it out of stock after I placed said order. It would have been Emma Frost inspired, it would have been so cool. But all in all, it was still a magical time. I still did have a really nice dress to wear if I wanted to wear it to the gala. The first annual Hellfire Gala was mainly coordinated and organized by Emma Frost and the Hellfire Trading Company, in cooperation with many other mutant teams and operations on the island. So many things happened throughout the night in terms of having great importance to the narrative, from the X-Men election to the beautiful psychic fireworks show and to the much anticipated special announcement, which turned out to be about Krakoa extending their reach to a whole other planet in planet-size X-Men. Also, we got to follow Kurt's adventures as Nightcrawler as he wandered through the night and just got more and more intoxicated, which was like also very fun. Maybe not like the most narratively important, but just really great. Number 3, Destiny returns. The return of Destiny was another moment all of us X-fans have been waiting for. Mystique has been pining for Destiny ever since the creation of Krakoa, where all mutants who have passed away can potentially be returned to us with the resurrection protocols. However, Krakoa, it seems, was not really interested in resurrecting precogs, and of course Magneto and Professor X are operating on strict orders from Moira to basically never resurrect Destiny, no matter the reasoning. As a result, Mystique decides it's time she took her beloved's fate into her own hands. When she realizes that Krakoa will never basically give her what she wants, she uses her power set to impersonate her enemies and use their power and influence to get Destiny's DNA and then use it to resurrect her herself. Not only does Mystique bring Destiny back, but she also nominated her for a seat on the Quiet Council. And guess what? She also got it. Drama! Number 2, Moira's secret is revealed. In Inferno, it is revealed to other mutants outside of the exclusive few that know that Moira McTaggart is alive and well, and that she is a mutant. The truth comes out and it is revealed to Emma Frost, whom Professor X and Magneto finally decide to trust with their secret, especially as we now have to deal with the return of Destiny. However, it turns out that Emma is, not as understanding of their secrecy as they had hoped. As such, they instead make an enemy out of the White Queen, who seems to be leaning more towards allying herself with Destiny and Mystique instead in the coming days. Moira, on the other hand, also seems to be interested in behaving a bit more recklessly. She ends up seemingly kidnapped by Orcus, but when Charles and Eric head in and try to save her, they learn it was all a trap, and it is revealed to us that Moira was actually kidnapped by Mystique and Destiny. Oh dear. In one foul swoop, they have acquired Moira and put Magneto and Professor X in a seemingly inescapable trap. So it got pretty crazy pretty quickly in Inferno. There's also so many things just from that series that I could talk about that are huge moments. Number 1, introducing the region of Mars. One of the biggest moments had to be when Mars was revealed to have been terraformed by the mutants so that they could move Arakko there. Mutants had claimed Mars, something that Earth wouldn't soon forget, and possibly something that heroes also of Earth won't soon forget either. As Krakoa continued to extend their reach further into space in the Hellfire Gala issue of S.W.O.R.D., we'd learn who they appointed to govern and rule over their new planet. Of course, who better to act as the planet's guiding force and monarch, if you will, than Storm, aka Aurora Monroe. Kind of became like the Queen of Mars, which is pretty awesome. And so Storm would leave the Marauders and take on a new role as the Queen of Mars, or as it's known now, Planet Arakko, because it belongs to the mutants now, baby.